Pacific Ocean was a battlefield unlike anything the world had ever seen. Far away from the massive cities and industrial powerhouses of World War II, thousands of miles across endless blue water, a different kind of war was being fought. A war of islands. A war of jungles. A war where every hill, every cave, and every piece of ground could become a grave. And standing in the middle of this brutal conflict were two forces that would create one of the most intense rivalries in military history: the Imperial Japanese Army and the United States Marines. The Marines were known around the world for their courage, discipline, and ability to fight in impossible conditions. They had fought in deserts, mountains, and cities. But the Pacific was different. Here the enemy was hidden. The battlefield itself was alive. The heat was unbearable. The jungle was unforgiving. And behind every tree, every rock, and every shadow could be a Japanese soldier waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But why did Japanese soldiers develop such a strong hatred and fear toward American Marines? Why did they consider the Marines one of the most dangerous fighting forces they had ever faced? The answer was not simply because of weapons. It was not only because of numbers. It was because the Marines represented something the Japanese military struggled to stop. A force that kept coming forward. No matter how difficult the battle became. No matter how many soldiers were lost. The Marines continued. And this unstoppable advance became one of the greatest nightmares for Japanese defenders across the Pacific. Chapter 2. The Pacific War begins. On December 7, 1941, the world changed forever. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor pulled the United States directly into World War II. In the months that followed, Japan expanded rapidly across the Pacific. They captured territory after territory. From the Philippines to Southeast Asia, Japanese forces built an empire that seemed unstoppable. At the time, many believed Japan had created one of the most powerful military machines in the world. Japanese soldiers were highly trained. They followed strict discipline. They were taught that surrender was dishonorable. The idea of fighting until death was deeply connected to the military culture of Imperial Japan. For many Japanese commanders, losing a battle was acceptable. But surrender was not. This belief created a completely different style of warfare. American forces often fought with the goal of defeating the enemy and surviving. Japanese forces were prepared to fight until the very last man. This difference would make battles in the Pacific some of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. And soon, the Japanese would meet the force that would challenge their entire way of war. The United States Marine Corps. Chapter 3. Why the Marines were different. The United States Marines were not just another military unit. They were designed for one specific purpose: taking the impossible. Before World War II, Marines specialized in amphibious warfare, landing on hostile beaches, creating a foothold, and attacking positions that seemed impossible to capture. In the Pacific, this skill became essential. Japan controlled thousands of islands. Many were surrounded by dangerous waters and protected by heavily fortified positions. The United States could not simply march across land. Every island had to be taken. Every beach had to be captured. Every Japanese position had to be destroyed. And the Marines became the spearhead of this island-hopping strategy. When Japanese soldiers saw American landing craft approaching the beaches, they knew what was coming. The Marines were coming. This created a psychological effect. The arrival of Marines meant that the battle would not end quickly. It meant relentless pressure. It meant artillery, air attacks, naval bombardment, and finally the Marine assault. The Japanese military respected strength, and they recognized the Marines as one of the strongest opponents they had ever encountered. Chapter 4. Guadalcanal, the First Nightmare. In August 1942, American Marines landed on Guadalcanal. It was one of the first major Allied offensives against Japan. The island looked like paradise. Beautiful beaches, dense forests, warm tropical waters. But behind that beauty was a nightmare. The Japanese had built an important airfield there. Controlling Guadalcanal meant controlling movement across the Pacific. The Marines landed and immediately faced fierce resistance. Japanese soldiers attacked at night. They moved silently through the jungle. They launched surprise attacks. They used the darkness as a weapon. But the Marines refused to break. They defended their positions. They adapted. They survived conditions that destroyed many soldiers physically and mentally. The battle became a test of endurance. Disease, starvation, exhaustion, constant attacks. The Marines experienced all of it. But they kept fighting. For the Japanese military, this was a shocking realization. They expected the Americans to eventually collapse. Instead, the opposite happened. The longer the battle continued, the stronger the Marines became. Guadalcanal sent a message across the Pacific. The United States Marines were not an enemy that could simply be pushed away. They were an enemy that had arrived to stay. Chapter 6. The Battle of Tarawa, Hell on the Beach. November 1943. The island of Tarawa. A tiny piece of land in the Pacific. But what happened there became one of the most brutal examples of Marine determination. The Japanese had heavily fortified the island. They built bunkers, placed machine guns, created defensive positions designed to destroy any attacker. The Marines approached by landing craft. But the shallow waters created a disaster. Many boats became stuck. Men had to leave the safety of the landing craft and move through water under enemy fire. Japanese guns opened up. Explosions filled the air. The beach became a battlefield of chaos. Many soldiers never reached the shore. But those who did kept moving forward. This was the moment Japanese defenders witnessed something terrifying. The Marines were taking massive losses. Yet they continued advancing. One wave was hit. Another came. Then another. The Japanese defenders fought with everything they had. But the Marines refused to stop. After the battle, Japanese resistance on Tarawa was almost completely destroyed. But the cost was enormous. The battle showed the world the brutal reality of Pacific warfare. And it showed Japan that the Marines were willing to enter some of the deadliest places on Earth and survive. Chapter 7. The Island Fortress of Peleliu. By 1944, the Japanese military had learned a painful lesson. The Americans were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to take every island, every base, and every position standing between them and Japan. But Japan had also changed its strategy. Instead of trying to defeat American forces on the beaches, Japanese commanders began creating islands that were designed to become killing zones. They built deeper defenses. They created underground networks. They prepared for battles that would last until the final soldier. One of the most terrifying examples was the island of Peleliu, a small island in the Palau group. From the outside it looked insignificant. But beneath the surface, Japan had transformed it into a fortress. The island was filled with caves, hidden artillery positions, machine gun nests, and defensive lines designed to punish any attacker. When the Marines landed in September 1944, they expected a difficult battle. But they did not expect what was waiting for them. The Japanese defenders had learned from previous defeats. They no longer rushed forward in large attacks. Instead they waited. They allowed American forces to move inland. Then they attacked from hidden positions. The battlefield became a nightmare. The heat was extreme. The landscape was filled with sharp coral rocks. The enemy was almost invisible. Every step could trigger an attack. For weeks, Marines fought through one of the most difficult battles of the Pacific War. The Japanese soldiers refused to surrender. They fought from caves until they were destroyed. They launched attacks when victory was impossible. To the Marines, this was a new level of determination. To the Japanese, the Marines represented an enemy that could survive anything. Chapter 8. Why the Marines terrified Japanese commanders. The fear was not only about the Marines' weapons. Japan had powerful soldiers. Japan had skilled officers. Japan had experienced fighters. But the Marines had something that created a dangerous advantage. Adaptability. The Marines learned from every battle, every mistake, every enemy tactic. If Japanese forces created stronger defenses, the Marines found new ways to overcome them. If the Japanese changed their strategies, the Marines adapted. They studied the battlefield. They improved their methods. And they kept advancing. This created a psychological problem for Japanese commanders. A traditional enemy could be defeated. A scared enemy could be forced to retreat. But the Marines were different. They accepted the danger. They expected the battle to be brutal. They trained for the impossible. The Japanese military often relied on fear and intimidation. But against the Marines, those methods became less effective. The Marines had already seen the worst. And they continued forward. Chapter 9. The Battle of Iwo Jima, the symbol of Marine determination. February 1945. A small volcanic island appeared on the horizon. Iwo Jima. It was one of the most important battles of the Pacific War. The island was heavily defended by Japanese forces under General Tadamaki Kuribayashi. Unlike earlier commanders, Kuribayashi understood that Japan could not defeat the United States through traditional attacks. Instead, he created a defense designed to cause maximum damage. Thousands of underground tunnels connected Japanese positions. Artillery was hidden. Soldiers waited beneath the ground. The Marines would not face an enemy standing openly on the battlefield. They would face an enemy hidden inside the island itself. The invasion began with one of the largest naval bombardments in history. The ocean shook. The sky filled with smoke. The island was attacked from every direction. But when Marines landed, Japanese guns opened fire. The battlefield became chaos. The Marines moved forward under intense pressure. They fought for every inch, every hill, every bunker, every cave. The fighting was brutal because the Japanese defenders refused to give up. They knew the island would fall eventually, but they wanted to make the Americans pay for every step. And the Marines did exactly what Japanese commanders feared. They kept moving. The image of Marines raising the American flag on Mount Suribachi became one of the most famous moments of World War II. But behind that image was a battle filled with sacrifice. Thousands died. Thousands were wounded. And Iwo Jima proved something the Japanese already knew. The Marines could be slowed, but they could not be stopped. Chapter 10, The Battle of Okinawa, the Final Test. The final major battle of the Pacific War was Okinawa. It was the closest major battlefield to mainland Japan. For Japan, Okinawa was not just another island. It was the last defensive wall. For the United States, capturing Okinawa would bring American forces dangerously close to Japan itself. The Japanese prepared for the ultimate battle. They built massive defensive positions. They prepared thousands of soldiers. They planned to use every weapon available, including kamikaze attacks. The battle became one of the bloodiest conflicts in the Pacific. American forces faced fierce resistance. The terrain was brutal. The weather was terrible. The fighting seemed endless. But once again the Marines moved forward. They fought through impossible conditions. They attacked heavily defended positions. They survived attacks that would have broken many armies. The Japanese military saw that the same pattern was repeating. The Americans arrived. They suffered losses, but they continued. The Marines became a symbol of unstoppable pressure. Chapter 11, The Enemy Who Would Not Break. By the end of World War II, Japanese soldiers had developed a deep respect for American Marines. The hatred came from the battlefield, from the brutal fighting, from the constant pressure. But beneath that hatred was recognition. The Marines were dangerous because they were prepared. They were trained. They were disciplined. And they refused to stop. The Japanese military had created a warrior culture built around sacrifice. But they discovered that the Marines had created a different kind of warrior culture. One built around teamwork, preparation, technology, and the determination to complete the mission. The Marines did not win because they were fearless. They won because they moved forward despite fear. Chapter 12, The Legacy of the Pacific Marines. The Pacific War changed the world forever. The battles between Japanese forces and American Marines remain some of the most studied military conflicts in history. They showed the extreme limits of human endurance. They showed the cost of war. And they showed how two completely different military philosophies collided across thousands of miles of ocean. The Japanese soldiers fought with incredible determination. The American Marines fought with incredible determination. But the difference was that the Marines had the ability to replace losses, adapt strategies, and continue the fight. For Japanese defenders across the Pacific, the arrival of Marines meant one thing. A battle was coming. A battle that would test everything. Strength, courage, discipline, and survival. Because the Marines were not just another enemy. They were the force that kept advancing. The force that would not disappear. The force that changed the course of the Pacific War forever. Chapter 13, The Psychological War Between Two Armies. The Pacific War was not only fought with bullets, bombs, and ships. It was also fought inside the minds of the soldiers. For both the Japanese and American forces, understanding the enemy became just as important as defeating them. The Japanese military had spent years building a reputation of fear. Across Asia and the Pacific, Japanese forces were known for their discipline, speed, and willingness to fight without surrender. Many Allied soldiers had heard stories about Japanese attacks. They heard about soldiers charging forward despite overwhelming odds. They heard about defenders fighting from hidden positions until the very end. The image of the Japanese soldier was one of a warrior who could not be easily defeated. But then the Marines arrived, and the psychological balance began to change. The Japanese soldiers who had defeated many opponents suddenly faced an enemy who did not react the way they expected. The Marines did not retreat after suffering losses. They did not collapse under pressure. They did not lose their fighting spirit. Instead, they adjusted. They learned. And they returned stronger. This created a powerful psychological impact. The Japanese military understood that every future battle against the Marines would become a fight against an enemy that became more experienced with every island captured. The Marines were not just approaching Japanese territory. They were bringing a message. The balance of power was changing. Chapter 14. The Marines and the Art of Island Warfare. The Pacific battlefield created challenges unlike any war before it. There were no long front lines. No massive armies moving across open fields. Instead, the war was fought on thousands of islands scattered across the ocean. Each island was different. Some were covered with thick jungle. Some were made of volcanic rock. Some were nothing more than tiny pieces of land surrounded by ocean. The Marines had to become experts at fighting everywhere. They learned how to land under fire, how to move through jungles, how to destroy underground defenses, how to survive without comfort or safety. This ability made them extremely dangerous. Japanese commanders could prepare defenses. They could build bunkers. They could create traps. But they could not predict exactly how the Marines would respond. The Marines became masters of adapting to impossible situations. And that adaptability became one of their greatest weapons. Chapter 15. The weapon Japan could not defeat. American industry. The Japanese military was built around discipline and sacrifice. The American military was powered by something different. Industrial strength. Behind every Marine fighting on the front line was a massive system producing weapons, vehicles, ships, aircraft, and supplies. The United States had the ability to replace equipment faster than Japan could destroy it. When a Marine unit suffered losses, replacements arrived. When equipment was damaged, new supplies followed. When an island was captured, the Americans used it as a base for the next attack. Japan could fight incredibly hard. But it could not match the resources coming across the Pacific. For Japanese soldiers, this became one of the most frustrating realities of the war. They could win battles. They could delay advances. They could inflict heavy casualties. But they could not stop the machine behind the Marines. The war was becoming a battle of endurance. And America had more endurance. Chapter 16. The Marines in the eyes of Japanese soldiers. Japanese soldiers did not see the Marines as ordinary opponents. They saw them as a symbol. A symbol of a powerful nation that was slowly moving closer to Japan. A symbol of an enemy that could survive the harshest conditions. A symbol of a war that was turning against them. Many Japanese defenders respected the courage of Marines even while fighting against them. The battlefield created a strange reality. Two armies could hate each other during combat. But soldiers often understood the bravery of the enemy standing in front of them. The Marines respected the determination of Japanese defenders. The Japanese respected the determination of the Marines. Both sides understood that they were facing men willing to endure incredible suffering. Chapter 17. The Road to Japan. By 1945, American forces had captured island after island. The distance between the Pacific battlefield and mainland Japan became smaller. Every victory brought American forces closer. And every defeat brought Japan closer to the end. The Marines had fought through some of the most difficult battles in military history. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Polillo, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each battle left behind thousands of stories. Stories of courage. Stories of loss. Stories of survival. But they also created something larger. A reputation. The Japanese military knew exactly who was coming next. The Marines. The same force that had crossed beaches under fire. The same force that had entered impossible battles. The same force that refused to stop. Chapter 18. Why the Marines became Japan's most feared opponent. The answer was not one single battle. It was the pattern. Again and again, Japanese forces created defenses they believed could stop America. Again and again, the Marines found a way through. The Marines were feared because they represented inevitability. They represented an enemy that would keep returning. An enemy that would learn. An enemy that would continue moving forward. Japanese soldiers had fought many enemies before. But fighting the Marines meant facing a force designed specifically for the hardest missions. They were the first wave. The breakthrough force. The soldiers sent where victory seemed impossible. And that reputation followed them across the Pacific. Chapter 19. The Cost of Victory. The story of the Marines in the Pacific is not only a story of victory. It is also a story of sacrifice. Thousands of Marines never returned home. Families lost sons, brothers, and fathers. Young men who had dreams and futures were left on distant islands thousands of miles away. The battles that created the Marine legend also showed the terrible cost of war. Every victory came with a price. Every captured island represented lives lost. The Pacific War was not a movie. It was real people facing unimaginable situations. And remembering that sacrifice is one of the most important parts of understanding history. Chapter 20. The final legacy. When the war ended in 1945, the world entered a new era. The Japanese Empire was gone. The United States had emerged as a global superpower, and the Marines had earned a place in military history. The reason Japanese soldiers feared fighting American Marines was not because the Marines were unbeatable. They were not. They suffered defeats. They made mistakes. They faced moments of extreme danger. But what made them different was their ability to continue, to adapt, to fight, and to move forward. The Pacific War was one of the greatest tests of human endurance. And in that ocean of islands, the Marines became the force that changed history. A force remembered not only for the battles they won, but for the determination they carried into every battlefield. Because when the landing boats approached the shore, when the sound of artillery filled the air, when the jungle waited ahead, Japanese soldiers knew exactly what was coming. The Marines had arrived.